Hello, my name is Richard Haight, and today is the first public mentoring. We have a guest, Clint, who would like to go over a certain issue, which I'll read to you right now. And we'll go ahead and get started. Please enjoy. My name is Clint. I'm 30 years old, and I'm from South Africa. I've listened to your email lessons, and I have read The Unbound Soul, and have always worked my way through and have also worked my way through part of Insperience. I have played around with your meditation techniques and had a dream the very night I tried it where I did the technique in the dream and felt energy zipping through me. In the dream, I started with the hearing first, though, which brought me to a more powerful experience for me. I'm interested in participating in public mentoring, and I have recently discovered a core issue in my life at work, an issue of power. I've spent much of my energy in my life trying to be as small and insignificant as possible. I started out with very low self-esteem and little to no confidence, a strong sense of lack of self-worth, feeling like I was not deserving or enough. My father passed away just after I turned 11, and I realized then that he defined who I was in such a big way that when he left, I had no clue who I was. He was a domineering individual, a strong personality type, and I think for the most part, he didn't understand me. Since then, I have been on a journey of self-discovery. I have developed self-confidence in certain areas of my life and have shifted some of the belief systems holding me back, but still I feel this deeper issue of power at work in my life, and I can see the threads of it touch so many areas of my experience. It is as if I'm afraid to step into my power, who I really am, for who knows what reason. A large part of me is frustrated by this, and I feel that many experiences in my life have not come to fruition because of this underlying issue at work, which makes me feel like turning back on the experiences I have missed time and again. Namely, having a relationship with a woman. I have in turn realized that it is not a relationship with a woman that I really desire, but a true relationship with myself. I have also had some emotionally powerful dreams where I am aware of a deep longing and sadness within me. The longing for something has permeated into and through much of my life. A longing for something, a longing for home, wherever that may be. I have had dreams where fear would play a big part. I have since learned how to face fear, step through it, so to speak, and have seen the transformation in both my dreams and life because of that. I have also played the victim in much of my early life and have realized that it does not serve me at all. There are some echoes of it in my life, but now, near to the degree that, but nowhere near to the degree that I carried it around with me before. I know there is more to life than meets the eye, and I want to get on with living it, and I'm frustrated at times by the seemingly slow pace of it all. All right, I think that pretty well summarizes the situation. Is that correct, Clint? Do you still feel that way? What's going on with you now?
Yeah, I mean, I got your email a day or so ago, and I immediately responded and sat and typed that out to kind of just give you a bit of a context of where I am at in my life at the moment. Mm-hmm. And it's definitely come to light this year for me, all these different feelings that have recurred at different times and at different degrees through my journey. And they kind of are reaching a bit of a point where I'm starting to see them everywhere. It's kind of like a really big in my face thing at this point in time. And I think for the first time in my life, there's a part of me that is not depressed by it or despondent because of it. I'm angry and I'm frustrated at where I find myself, because I'm ready to move past all of this stuff, but it's just, how do you get to that place? Where's that switch that I need to flip? what is it that I need to shift so I can see this differently and change my experience, you know?
Yeah, there was so much depth and dimension to what you wrote, and any particular aspect of what you wrote is a rabbit hole in itself.
Yeah.
One of the things that's going on is that when you were young, your father being domineering as he was, and your personality type may be much more subtle, more sensitive, and that
Yeah.
domineering would not allow you to fully explore your own experiences and find your own personality fully, or fully bring out the depth of it. And so that's actually a common phenomenon. This is actually where I started out as well. My father, you described my father perfectly, only he didn't pass away when I was young. In fact, it brought me to a point when it was in my 20s, when I would meet anybody who had a similar energy to him, I would just like start crying. It was really strange. I didn't understand why. And later on, I understood what was going on. The issue is not exactly psychological. It would be perceived that way, but what's happening is your nervous system is having a certain response. It's going into a fight, flight, or avoidance response, or a fear response, which is going to make you unable to face whatever the issue is in front of you, where your personality has not developed sufficiently to face it.
Yeah.
And that's ultimately where you're going to be experiencing your difficulties. And because it's not really logical, it's a nervous system level response. You can't logic your way out of it.
Yeah, the funny thing is, you know, like I didn't really have a strong relationship with my father when I was young. But in his passing, through dreams, I've developed a relationship with him. And it's really blossomed into something that, you know, I'm very grateful for. And I love my father, you know, whereas I wouldn't have necessarily felt quite like that when he was alive. And I believe that him leaving, he gave a gift to me. He gave me the opportunity to experience who I was, you know, to go down this path. I mean, it hasn't been an easy one, but it's definitely been something worthwhile. And I've chosen to look at it as a gift that he's been given me, you know, given to me by him, where he removed himself from my life. And I was able to find out who I really am, what I'm really made of. But then you've also got this kind of weird scenario of the strong male figure, or, you know, some kind of male figure guide in your life to help you along your path when you stumble and stuff is not there. And I definitely feel the effects of not having that kind of masculine energy in my life. I've had it in bits and pieces throughout my life, but nothing constant, you know.
Yeah. What you're experiencing is a lot of reason why men will join a martial arts dojo, or the football team, or, you know, a wrestling club, or whatever, where they're really, you know, they're not necessarily looking for competition per se. They may think they are, but in a lot of cases, they're actually looking for a father figure. And
yeah,
it's understandable. I mean, you know, when you're growing up, your body is actually developing its understanding of the masculine energy from your father, and women simply can't fulfill that aspect of the role unless it's a highly masculine woman. In such case, you may have problems with lacking the feminine aspect.
Yeah. You know, it's funny that you mentioned karate, because, I mean, my dad started me on karate when I was about 3 years old. And I did karate right up until just after he passed away, and I stopped. And it's been 18, 19 years or something of me not doing karate. And yesterday was my first class I had taken in like 18 or 19 years. And I felt really good at being back in a dojo, and I can already see the difference in the way I think about what karate meant to me. And, you know, I'm looking forward to seeing where this goes. But it's something that I've been wrestling in my mind about going back or not going back. But yeah, it seems I've made some kind of shift to step back into that and see where this takes me.
No, that's a beautiful realization that I don't know to the degree that you consciously entered into that. Were you were you aware that you were going there for the father figure masculinity aspect? What was the
Well,
conscious motive?
when I was a kid, I was just put in there, you know.
Yeah, of course.
And I did it for all those years. And for me, it was, you know, there was a part of me that wanted to impress my dad. There was a part of me that wanted to make him proud of me, you know, and to do well and succeed.
Mm-hmm.
And it actually defined a big part of me. And after he passed away, I did a grading a couple of months after, and I failed my first grading in my life, and I was absolutely devastated.
Mm-hmm.
To the point where I basically stopped doing karate, mm-hmm. and I just was never going to go back. Mm-hmm. That fear of failure and having failed and having let down, you know, mm-hmm. what I thought was letting down my dad or letting down myself, or mm-hmm. it was just too much to handle. And for me, at this point in time, what I feel it is for me is it's engaging with physical reality a little bit more, you know, getting my body active a lot more, because it's something, I'm a very mental person. I spend a lot of time in my head. It's my safe place. It's the place where I'm comfortable, you know. So bringing that energy down into physical reality and engaging in doing things that are physical is something that I feel I need in my life to ground myself. Mm-hmm. And I think it's important for me to face the very thing that that a part of me left because of this idea of failure in a way, you know, and I feel like it's important for me to step back into that space and show myself that, you know, I didn't fail. It's just, I don't know. I still haven't quite figured out what this is for me. Mm-hmm. I don't know if I am looking for a father figure. Maybe it is a subconscious thing, but I don't consciously feel like I am. I think, you know, part of what I'm trying to do for myself is become the teacher that I've been seeking all my life, become the mentor that I've been seeking all my life. And and that's what I'm trying to do. And so how do I do that? Well, I need to empower myself.
You're doing that right now, because you had the realization that you're not seeking a father figure, but that you actually have to model the behavior, model the energy in life that you're moving towards.
Yeah, which is tricky, because how do you do that when you don't know what that is? You know, you kind of have to define that yourself. It's an odd thing to do. It's
what it is, and this is exactly what I find everybody who's going through the awakening path goes through. So sometimes we have a tendency to think that if we had the right parents, or our parents were perfect, we would end up, you know, we would just be naturally awakened. But the reality
I've had the same thought.
But the reality is, even if you had two awakened parents and a child born to those parents, the child at some point has to self-actualize.
I understand it. Yeah.
And the process of self-actualizing it's almost like you put a blindfold over you, and then you have to walk through a maze. You don't know where point Z is from point A. You know, there is maybe a path that goes through and there really is no point Z, but there's a path that leads through this maze. And the closer you get towards the end of the maze, we'll say that there really isn't an end. We'll call the end of the maze harmony, or a balance of all of the elements, masculine and female, and awareness of the two. It's almost like this yin yang, or yin-yo. You've seen that diagram, right, with the white half and the black half, and the opposite colors in both halves.
Yes.
When we're right in the middle of that diagram, metaphorically speaking, and the middle actually encompasses the totality, that's the balance we're speaking. It's a dynamic balance. It's not an end point. It's a way of life. It's a way of life. And the closer we get towards the end of that maze, metaphorically speaking, the more we're in that nexus point or center point of the total awareness. And that creates a change in the way the nervous system processes information, or the way that the brain and the nervous system interact, I guess. When we're fumbling around, bumbling around, and we're at the extremes of that diagram, which is early on, then the nervous system is very, very insecure. And it's going to create feelings of disharmony, feelings of fear and insecurity, that sort of thing. But the further down the path we go, there is a deep wellness of centering that happens that is alive. There's a kind of confidence that isn't the typical confidence that you read about, that people talk about, which is self-confidence. Because at that point, you don't have the idea of self anymore. Like if you were to ask me honestly, I wouldn't say, I am Richard. Richard is the name of this body. What I am is well beyond my capacity to explain. It's an interconnection with all it is the experience. That's the perception. And what ends up happening at that point is the way that we move through life is more like a baby learning to walk. The baby doesn't say to itself, I can do this, right? Or I'm not good enough, and then give up, right? Just keeps trying to get up and walk. Doesn't matter how many times it fails, it just keeps doing it. You know, it might cry when it hurts itself, doesn't matter. 15, 20 minutes later, it's trying it again. And that's not masculine or feminine. That's instinctive persistence. It's not willful. It's not willful. You see it?
Yeah.
And so what you're really going towards ultimately is that place where accomplishment is done through this kind of natural persistence. There isn't a voice that says, I can or I can't do, which is a false confidence. Right.
Yeah, I can see that.
It sounds
ego
strange.
It
sounds strange, but it's actually very simple.
Yeah, it's ego speaking when you say, I can do this or I can't do this.
That's right.
It's ego speaking in some form or another.
That's right. It's an attempt to brainwash the mindset, I guess. Right. It's a kind of lie. Either way is a lie. It's unnecessary.
Yeah.
Now, a person that's where the nervous system is not feeling that interconnectedness, that's all they have. All they have is the ego with which to work with. And so you can start from that point. That's all right. But you're going to work ever so surely towards less narrative on the topic.
And I can see how that's connected to a process of letting go of the outcome. Because once you let go of the outcome, you enter into a process of just movement.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And a movement in a certain direction, but there's no judgment on where you're going. You're just moving in a direction, and accomplishment isn't something that you attain.
That's right.
Or maybe it doesn't even become a thing anymore. It's just the movement which matters.
Mm-hmm. It's a flowing forward movement. I remember we had, when I was practicing in Japan, it's very, very common for people to join the dojo at train swordsmanship, that sort of thing. It's very common for people to join the dojo and train for 3 or 6 months and then give up. Sometimes you would have the opportunity to talk about their mindset with them. Somebody might, for example, a younger student came to me and asked me to sort of mentor them, help them stay in the dojo, to keep with it no matter how difficult it was. And they'd become very frustrated, and they had this narrative in their mind which they couldn't shake, which is, I can't do this, this is impossible. I mean, it's a high level art, and it's very difficult to do. And the first thing I pointed out to them is I don't have such a narrative. I don't care about whether I can do this right now or not. I've just decided to stick with it and keep moving forward. And when a narrative or words like that enter the mind, I just give it no power. And what ends up happening is you just continually move forward. At some point, you've received whatever that original end goal you may have had in mind, the master's certificate or whatever, but you realize there's still a lot more to learn. The path never ends. Having the 10th degree Grand Master license, that's nothing. That's not really what you were. That's not the real motivation behind it, or that's not a true motivation. It's a false motivation. It's an egoic motivation to have that.
Yeah, but like I said, it may have been the original motivation, but it's certainly not going to satisfy you once you've actually got there.
Yeah, it doesn't make you any happier to get that end goal.
Yeah.
In fact, it can be quite. If that was your original motivation, and by some miracle that took you through to the end, and then you got the quote unquote end, and then you received that, certificate and scroll and whatever, and then you realize 6 months later that you were no more happier than you were before then, it actually could be very depressing.
Yeah.
Right? And so basically we just, in the awakening path, we stop playing with that entirely. And the way we do that is, it's an acknowledgement of how a baby progresses through developmental process. And that is, it's just this natural, instinctive, non-willful baby step approach to life.
It's a non-willful, but it's a willing. There is a willingness to it, though.
Yeah, they're engaged.
Which is, yeah.
They're engaged. They're fully engaged.
Yeah. Because I can hear you. I mean, a baby doesn't think, I'm going to get up and walk. It's not something it has to conquer or achieve. It is just something that it spurred on to do through some means, through some mechanism.
Yes.
The desire to move. I mean, that's, a baby wants to get from here to there. How do I do that? Well, I got to move,
Mm-hmm. Now, you can see that all of the rest of nature does that throughout their lives. Human beings are the only creatures that diverge from the natural path. And it's because we have the capacity to think abstractly, which means we have the capacity to say, I am me, and meanness equals whatever your various personality traits are, your strengths, your weaknesses, your level of beauty, and all that stuff. Right? And that all just spirals out of control. There's also the abstract teaching, which is that you can will things to occur, and that is the best way to get anything done, is to be highly willful, right? And to have an end goal.
Yeah.
And that becomes actually, all that becomes a barrier. Everything becomes a fight. Now, everything in nature is aiming towards something. It doesn't matter if it's an animal or a tree or a plant, whether the aims are conscious or instinctive, it's irrelevant. It's all aiming towards something and moving in a flowing way towards that aim. And that which does not aim or sufficiently move towards that aim, whatever it is, assuming that it's an aim that's in alignment with all that is, that which is out of alignment with all that is, or doesn't, its level of competence and aim don't match up, gets crushed out of existence.
Well, it's an interesting thing you say there, because I mean, you're saying it gets crushed out of existence. Then how is it that we can be in this situation that we're in, where we're so far off that track? Or I maybe perceive sometimes I'm off that track, or humanity's off that track, to such a large degree. How is it that we're still here?
Well, the body is still here because we've been able to so insulate ourselves from the crushing aspect of the universe. So basically what ends up happening is, at some point the whole thing just collapses, which is kind of where society is at the edge of right now. Where we're suffering from isn't necessarily right now physical death or physical suffering. It's a spiritual level suffering, a psychological level suffering, a torment.
Yeah.
A torment.
Yeah.
And the reason that torment exists is because we do continue to physically exist where the rest of nature would get crushed out of existence. So we're still existing in a way that's out of alignment with the natural flow, and that creates a tremendous degree of mental, emotional, psychic suffering. So the question then is it better to exist or not to exist? And that's where people are as individuals. That's where society is as a whole. On an unconscious level, we're considering suicide or homicide at an unconscious level.
Which is what's happening.
Asking ourselves, is it worth all this?
Yeah, but that's what's happening if you look around.
Mm-hmm. Exactly what's happening.
Yeah,
that's exactly what's happening. And the solution is both. It's very, very simple, and due to its subtlety, it's often elusive to the mind. And the solution is going back to that very natural degree of progress. We create an aim and allow a flowing towards it without the mental narrative of I can or I can't. right? Now that
Yeah.
mental narrative will certainly occur because that's the way the brain has been programmed over a lifetime. It's what it's been programmed to do. That's a value it's an artificial value that's been that's been programmed into our brains. And so it's
Or
going
into the
to,
human psyche even.
yeah, it's at a very deep level. And so the way that one gets beyond that is actually to notice when it occurs and not to believe it. We don't identify with we don't say that's my voice or that's my thought or that's true or not true. We add no power to it. So thoughts that arise within this being, they're not Richard's thoughts. They're not Richard's emotions. They're just thoughts and emotions. And they're not all that unique. You have many of the same tormenting thoughts and emotions that may have arisen in this body in the past.
Yeah.
We're not really as unique as we think we are. We're not all as creative as we maybe think we are either. And the way you find that out is you sit alone for 4 or 5 days in the wilderness with no distractions, and you realize how utterly repetitive and silly these thoughts are, how insane they are. And then you talk with other people that went through the same experience and you find out, well, geez, I really wasn't all that unique. So they're not your thoughts. And a lot of people are going through having these same thoughts and same experiences. You're not
I mean, I suppose we do have a shared experience, you know. I mean, we are plugged in, I believe we're plugged into a collective. And you know, there's different levels and layers of that, you know, and one of them is the human collective that we plug into tribal belief systems and all that kind of stuff, you know.
Sure.
We have our own relationships with that too.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I mean, how do you get to the point where you find out who you really are? Because if we're not our thoughts and we're not our emotions, and you know, those are the things that we think define us to such a large degree, you know, how do we find out who we really are?
The solution is in the problem. What's the question? Can you rephrase the question? Can you say the question again and really listen to it?
So I was saying, you know, like if the thoughts and the emotions and stuff are not who we are, but it is who we think we are.
Mm-hmm.
How do we find out who we really are? How do we feel that? How do we tap into that, who we really are-ness?
Mm-hmm. So the issue is actually in the assumption behind the question. And the assumption behind the question is that there is a who we are. And that we should find out who we are. But who we are is a personality. What I mean is the assumption behind who we are, it would ultimately equal a personality, right?
Or some idea construct.
An idea construct, which is mind, which is inherently a definition, which is inherently a limitation, a separation from all that is. So there isn't a who.
Yeah, which is limited. It's bounded, yeah.
At that level, there isn't a who. So the perception of this body is not that Richard is who this body, is not that Richard is who I am. There's no I to be a who. The name Richard just is a label on this body, like your address number is a label on your post office box or your street box or your house, so that someone can actually address your house and you can have communication. Like if there wasn't a name on this body and you called out to communicate with this body would have no way of knowing that you were attempting to communicate with it. You see, so identification is only used to the extent that it is useful and no more. Any more than is efficient to get something accomplished is noise, is disharmony. And so I can't say that there really is a self on an ultimate truth to self. It is a mental, emotional construct that at best allows for functionality, allows this thing to function in the world. At worst, it becomes an inner demon that causes our suffering. And
So
that's,
then how do you let go of the construct?
start
How
to
do you
notice it
disassemble
first.
the construct?
Start to notice it first. Start to notice that it's a lie. So if you pay attention to all thoughts of self, from the context of totality, you realize it's a lie. It's based on assumptions and biases.
Yeah.
It's based on comparisons. It's a lie. So the path to the path of awakening is ultimately, I have to be very careful about saying, anytime we say anything's 100%, there's another mental construct. But let's just say the fuel behind the path, the motivation down the path of awakening is the movement towards integrity. To be as authentic and deeply honest as possible. And when that motivation really blossoms, we start, quite naturally, we start to pay attention. There starts to be awareness of the thoughts within, the emotions within that are really not, that they're based on assumptions and biases, that they're out of alignment with all that is. And also out of alignment with this body's capacity to function in the world.
Yeah, and I can actually see how if you move towards what you're talking about, if you move towards that sense of integrity, that authenticness, that deeply honest, to being as deeply honest as possible, I can see how layers of the construct would disappear because you would see them for what they are, and they wouldn't serve any purpose in your life. They wouldn't have any meaning because they're not honest.
That's right.
So you would shed that.
Right.
Yeah.
As you go down the path of awakening, several things start to change, I guess would be a good word. One is perception of what is occurring within here becomes depersonalized, as well as projections of what is occurring out there become depersonalized. You're less and less inclined to fall into the trap of being insulted or insulting, of denigrating or being denigrated.
Like you rise above it.
Well, you see through it would be a way of saying it. That would probably be the most accurate. You just see the disharmony that it causes. And in the seeing of or perceiving of the disharmony that it causes, both now and in the future, a lot of disharmony arises later on to the conscious window of perception. But you start to gain an insight into the seed of disharmony and the later manifestation. The reason we keep feeding what is disharmonious and keep watering these seeds of disharmony is we don't actually make the connection between the seed and the manifestation. There's a disconnect in awareness between those two because they don't always occur. If it was obvious, as soon as you told a lie that you suffered, if it was obvious to you, you stop doing it.
Yeah, you'd learn very quickly.
You would learn very quickly, but it's not obvious because to a large degree, the lies that are uttered or thought or felt, the motivating forces and values behind them are unconscious. And there are layers and layers of motivating forces. And so we may think, oh, well, my motivation was to appear kind. So I lied and said I'd do it and I'd be happy to do it because I didn't want to look mean. I didn't want to appear, unkind. I wanted to look gracious. But the real motivation wasn't that at all. The real motivation goes much, much deeper. There's a great degree of pain behind that. There's a level of nervous system insecurity behind that. The fear of being judged badly is the fear that we will not be accepted into the group, right? That's a fear of our survival, actually, because a human being can't survive on its own. Human being is a social creature. And so the initial thought was maybe you want to appear kind. Most people won't even realize that. They just have this urge. They just have difficulty saying no, even though no might be the best answer. Oftentimes is. They just have a great difficulty saying no, so they kind of worm their way into yes. and that's all they know about it. When you become a little bit more aware, then you realize I don't want to say no because I didn't want to appear kind. I wanted to appear compassionate. But that's a lie too. It's not that you wanted to appear compassionate. You didn't want to be rejected. Right? You didn't want to be rejected because at the nervous system level, there's a level of insecurity that equates to an inability to survive.
So how do we tap into the nervous system information?
That's meditation. There are a number of ways of doing it, but meditation is the surefire way to do it. And it occurs in baby steps. You gain more and more awareness and sensitivity over repeated meditation sessions. Another way to do it, which some people will feel drawn to and others won't, and it's not something I can ever recommend for that reason, is psychedelics. What you get from psychedelics is a revelation of what has been harbored deeply within. Depends on the psychedelic. I can't speak to all of them, but so you may have a terrible experience, and the attitude towards it determines what you actually learn from it, right? So if it's a terrible experience, your attitude is it's a terrible experience, and you just dismiss it, all of your potential learning is lost. If you think to yourself, well, maybe this is revealing some deeper undigested disharmony within, that's a great learning opportunity. And that becomes a conduit through which you start to actually perceive what's happening in a nervous system level.
Okay.
The way that I gained this was through meditation and martial arts training. The type of martial arts that I train in is the effectiveness is dependent upon an alive, efficient, non-reactive nervous system state of the nervous system. Which means, for example, when you punch, there can't be anxiety. If you attack me, if there's any anxiety, it's not going to work. If there's a calm aliveness, it works amazingly well. And from that level, it's not really a technique, but it requires.
It's almost like a state of being.
Yeah, it's a state
almost like a state of being.
Yes, but to become more effective at it, to become sufficiently effective at it, it requires one to become aware of the nervous system responses. And so it's the intention. It's the repeated intention to become aware of that, which allows the body to actually, the window of perception to actually become aware of what's happening at a nervous system level, which is really a parasympathetic and a sympathetic level of awareness in the nervous system. So intention is really an essential aspect of the awakening process. Repeated, authentic, real curiosity and repeated intention. Because what it is that fit into your conscious window of perception is what you've valued.
Yeah, I believe that fully. I do believe that. I've had experiences, with my dreams where I used to not really remember them much, and I went down a road of exploring that reality, and I entrained myself. It became something that's important to me, and my relationship with my dreams, I dream pretty much every night. It's very seldom that I don't. And some of the experiences that I've had, I think, have only come about because I've put so much emphasis on them in my life. So I do believe what you're saying when you say that, when you value something like that, it becomes important to you, and it comes up. You become aware of it on another level.
And how long did it take for you to notice progress in terms of dream awareness?
This is a long time ago, but it was slow going at start. It was probably It was probably a good couple of months. It was actually a long time. I mean, like I would say 6 months to a year.
Mm-hmm. That's before
Maybe
you
is a
started to
good
notice clear progress.
Well, that whatever I'm doing is working,
Yes.
where you've seen a big enough shift and you go, okay, all this effort I'm putting in is actually counting for something. I'm remembering things clearly. I'm remembering a lot more. Oh my word, I've had this kind of experience in this process. That's something new. It builds intrigue. It makes it, and then the process just kind of runs with itself. It becomes actually easy. Yeah. You don't have to
self-edifying and self-verifying.
Yes, exactly. It feeds itself actually at the end of the day.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't have to put as much effort into it now, but I mean, I still keep a journal every day. Sometimes I don't write things down, but most of the time I do.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So you've answered your own question, and in terms of how do you go about making progress in your awakening to overcome these particular issues that you're suffering from. It's no different than what you did with dreams.
Okay.
The daily intention in tapping in is essential. Now, in what way do we need to be aware on a daily basis? So one of the things that needs to occur is actually becoming aware of when the feelings arise in the body of insecurity, where we're not able to take authority in the moment, where we may be avoiding certain responsibilities or avoiding certain aims because of the difficulty, and we may feel that we're insufficient for the task. It's going to be a narrative that occurs in the mind, right? So part of the intention is to become aware of what that narrative is.
Yeah, whether it's an emotional one or a mental one, or I mean, generally they are connected.
All mental noise, all thoughts, underlying them are emotions. Emotions are motivating forces for thoughts. They're the gasoline behind a thought. It's possible to have emotions without specific thoughts, but it's not possible to have specific thoughts without emotions fueling them.
Okay.
The energy of emotion. Right. So it's possible that that you may have emotion arising in the body that doesn't create a specific narrative. I'm not worthy, or I'm not good enough, or this is too difficult, or I'll fail, or that sort of stuff. But with this level of issue that you have, it's almost certain that there is a mental narrative going on.
Oh, no, there is. It's a big mental narrative, and it is, like I was saying to you earlier, it is spiderwebbed in my life. It amazes me. I'll be driving down the road, I'll be thinking about some problem, and I'll go, oh my gosh, it's linked to the same thing. 2 weeks later, I've got something else I'm looking at, and I go, wait a minute, this is linked to the same thing. It all comes down to this core issue. I thought the core issues were three. I thought it was, I'm not worthy, I'm not deserving, I'm not enough. And I realized that those three are connected to an issue of power for me. And to me, it amazes me how widespread this is in my life.
So what you've just described is how what I describe as identifications, how they multiply. And so you have essentially a kind of an upside down hierarchy, a lowerarchy, I don't know what you call it, of identifications. The lowest level one, we could describe that as, the ultimate demon, the ultimate inner demon. And from that one misconception, that one lack of harmony, because it's there, because there is an identification that has fueled it, and now that identification is speaking through our lives, it's affecting all of the strategies of our lives, the way that we interact with the world. It has essentially tainted everything.
Yes.
And so that affects the relationships with the people that we're going to have relationships with. We're more likely to choose people that we may think are safe and are not going to be non-judgmental or not going to challenge us too much. We may go down a certain...
But those people will inevitably end up reflecting the very core issue anyway.
Yes.
So no matter what choice you make, you're going to meet it no matter what.
Even if you're not aware of it, and that's usually the case, you're not aware of it, yes. And so what ends up happening is all of the structures of our life, where we live, who we relate to, who we want to talk to, who we avoid, the type of job we have, the way we interact with our job, the degree of success we have in that work, and just everything that we do, our types of entertainment, all of that, it all comes down to the influence of that essential base identification. And that central base identification, because of those multitude in which it can express, turns into a whole bunch of other identifications built on top of it that become millions. It's legion.
It seems ridiculous to me, actually.
Huh?
It seems so ridiculous to me, because when I see the picture like that, what I'm seeing is simply I'm seeing a construct, and I'm seeing something that has no power in and of itself. Mm-hmm. It is just a construct, and somehow we've invested ourselves into that root, seed, cause, or whatever it is, and we've created this problem out of absolutely nothing. Mm-hmm. It seems so ridiculous.
Well, it's not absolutely nothing. So it's not absolutely nothing. It's a problem. So what ends up occurring is, you're completely right that essentially our perception, whatever our is, but perception, the bodily perception, the window of awareness that the individual has completely fueled, has given birth to and completely fueled all of the psychological issues from which we suffer. In the entire structure of our lives through which their disharmony expresses. That is an absolutely true statement, but it isn't arising from completely nothing. It is arising from something. It's arising from a twofold issue, which is really one. At one level, it's seen as the desire. It's a natural thing. So desire is not exactly right. It's based on a biological issue, not really an issue, biological fact. The body is born into the world initially not knowing the difference between it and the world. Makes it not able to function. The degree of values that the body has at that time are very, very simple. Food and drink and that sort of thing. I mean, basically milk and affection, warmth, simple biological. Those are values that are inherent, that are in the genetics, in the body, that are not conscious, but they are values. Mm. And at some point, when the infant is, developing the capacity to perceive and to see in the world, it sees these prehensible things moving around. But there's also a feeling that connects these prehensible things to the body. So the body's able to feel that movement. Still doesn't have a connection between this and me. It hasn't made this connection as an association, but over time, it makes the association between what the eye sees and the feeling in the body and how they jive up. This is meanness. And say hands moving around and, it happens to knock a toy or whatever, and the toy moves. It's just now this movement has created a change in the world. But the body can't, the perceptive window is able to actually intend maybe these things to move. The eye looks at that object, intends it to move, and it doesn't. So that becomes other. It's the association that I can't will that to move, but I can sort of will this to move, and it behaves. There's now a sense of self and other. That's an essential understanding, so that the body can actually move through the world and attain the values it wants, attain the values it needs. It needs to get food, needs to get water, needs to be able to use the toilet, or all that stuff. Over time, that all develops. But at some point, there is the awareness, I am me, and this is me. And that's an essential, it's the first identification, I am, right? It's the first identification. But now that I am... the
identification with the perceptive window.
Yes.
Your perceptive window. Yes. And I know I had to use the word your there, but like the unique perceptive window that you find yourself, or your not self, seeing through.
Yes, and this is where language breaks down, because language is entirely built upon the assumption that the self is true. So in our language structure, I have to say, I am Richard and all that. It's just like a part of the language. If I were to speak totally honestly, with total integrity, it sounds like some weird alien speak, non-personalized third-person talk. That's the way I write my books. which more appropriately spoken, honestly, that's how the books are written. The editor hates it. Editor will call up Richard and say, you got to stop writing this way because no one wants to read that. It's hard to understand. It's depersonalized. It's unapproachable, right?
But that's the point.
Yes. But no one would read it. Right? That's what his point was. I'm like, okay, well, it'll be written in the first person. It'll be written in a personalized way. Fine. People will read it. And they're just going to have to go through the work of correcting their own language. At some point, maybe there'll be versions of the book that will be written in the original format if people are interested in going through it, because it's such a different perspective that it's challenging. It's very challenging to the mind, to the brain that always sees things in a personalized way. Right. So it's very challenging. At any rate, I digress. The point is, these identifications first occur as associations. They're meaning association level identifications. When you look at a door, you don't see a door anymore. You see the function of a door. You see an object through which you can navigate, through which you can use. You see it in a way that you can use it. When you see a table, you don't see the table the same way you saw it the very first time. You see how it functions. Those are all meaning associations that allow for function in the world. But now there's a me, and there's other. And there is danger in other. There's the demons in the night. There's the cougar. There's the child molester. There's the, scary father. There's all that stuff. And so there's the desire to protect. The desire to defend, to protect, to avoid the dangers. Is that wrong?
I don't think it's wrong, but I think it might just be a misidentification, a misunderstanding.
Yes, that's right. There's a point where it's useful. There's a point where it's useful and necessary. I mean, it is actually necessary. Like, for example, if you come into my house with a knife, I'm going to acknowledge that you've come into my house with a knife, and I'm going to acknowledge that there's a potential danger. It's important to have that awareness, right? It's when there's more energy poured into it than is necessary. Absent a better strategy, panic is pretty much what people have. Anger and all this negativity, which is what empowers the original identification. Absent a better strategy, I can't blame an infant or a child for not having a better strategy. Because they don't have the awareness for a more enlightened strategy.
Yeah.
All right. So when it's happening as a natural process, the personality, the sense of self develops. So there was this unconscious infant, and now there's the conscious individual, conscious of I am. It's identification level perception. It's not really best described as consciousness. I describe it as mind. It's reactive. It's assumptive. It's a lot of lies that have allowed function in the world absent a more enlightened perception. The next level of awakening is the realization that that's all it's not necessary anymore. Little by little, it becomes less necessary as awareness progresses in its capacity to see a more enlightened approach to life. And as that occurs, these identifications start to resolve. Not through judgment, but just awareness that it's no longer necessary. Right.
The funny thing is, like, if the mind is where this sits, it's almost like the mind has a mind of its own. Like, I don't know how to describe it anymore. Like, I don't know. I don't know how to say it any more than that. But it's like where does that reside? If there's this,
you are much further along in the awakening path than maybe you have acknowledged or realized. So let's acknowledge and celebrate that fact.
All right.
Because that's an essential understanding that doesn't generally occur unless someone told you until fairly far along in the process. It's because there's a window, there's a little spaciousness to where one can actually perceive what's occurring in the mind that one didn't necessarily intend. Right?
Okay.
And one realizes, oh, well, maybe I perceive that I was the decision maker, right? That I was making all of my choices. But when you really start to watch the mind, you see that there's a lot of things going on there that you didn't decide. And that the body does a lot of things that don't make any sense, that aren't necessarily useful. Responses and things like that. And okay, now, maybe there's more than one me, might be a perception. Right?
Yeah.
The way that there's a model which I use to describe this that is very, very beneficial early on in the awakening process. Now, bear in mind that no model is ultimately true. All models break down at some point, so we can only use it to the extent
because it's a construct.
It's a construct. So again, we don't add any more to it than is efficient or useful, and that's an appropriate use of mind. Right? That's a very rare use of mind, because almost always we clamp down and say this is true, or this is the way, or whatever. So I just be very careful that this is a construct of the mind. It's a model that will allow progress towards the next step. And as it becomes less useful, we discard it. Right? And the we there is no real we. Awareness discards it. It's set aside. And so the model is this. Look at the body as like your first horse. It's the first pet. And awareness is riding the body, your egoic window, whatever that is, that small little thing that you people think is them, is riding the body, right? And like a horse or like your dog, doesn't think the same way as, quote unquote, you do, the egoic perspective. Doesn't have all the same needs. It does not have all the same desires. And it does not have all the same values. And so there needs to be a relationship developed between the egoic window perspective and the body perspective. What your horse wants. Your horse wants hay. It doesn't want a steak. Right? That kind of, and you need to actually attend to what the body's true needs are. And you need to reward the body when it does it right. Right? And you're going to, essentially what's happening is starts to be a trusting relationship that develops between the window of perception and the body. And as that develops, the body stops resisting the process of awakening and actually starts to jump on board. Hey, this is great for me. I'm loving this.
Is this because the body has its own perceptual window?
Yes.
So there's a perceptual window
let's change that sentence just a tiny bit. The body has countless perceptive windows.
Well, that's what I was actually going to go to next, because what I'm seeing is that there's, depending on what level you look at it, whether you go to the atomic level or you go to a molecular level or you look at organs or you look at parts of the body, you're going to have different perceptual windows, but we're not necessarily aware of them. So we don't build a relationship in a way, or maybe an understanding doesn't, kind of, because I think if we had to see that it's all just perceptual windows, we would dissolve this idea of ourselves as a particular perceptual window.
That's right. That is your description there is very accurate to the perception of this one.
Yes.
There are perceptions within perceptions within perceptions within perceptions within perceptions within perceptions, and no one perception is ultimately true.
So then it becomes a question of how do you shift your perception?
The same way that you awakened to dreams. Same way that you were able to shift perception to value and then experience dreams consciously.
Okay, I can see that.
Intention.
So I have the intention and the desire.
Yes.
And it's something that I have had much of my life, because I strongly believe in the power of shifting perception. It's something that I spend a lot of time on, because you could be sitting with a problem and not knowing how to solve it. But I know that if you were able to shift your perspective to another place, it wouldn't be a problem anymore. It would cease instantly. And it's that ability, like if we could almost train ourselves to take our perception from one location to another and not identify ourselves so much with a specific aspect of perception, and go, well, if we have access to all modes of perception, how do I move within that?
Yes, that's right.
And then suffering would cease.
Yes, and so then the question comes down to a very simple one. To what degree do you value that approach? To what degree do you value? And it's easy to say, I value that the most, but we only find out the degree to which you value it based on how much you actually intend on a daily basis, repeatedly over an extended period of time, so that value can actually manifest.
Yes.
Right? If it's not a true value, what will happen is it'll be willful. 6 months down the road, you're like, I'm getting nowhere with this, and you give up, which means it was a false value. Or let's just say we weren't ready for that value yet.
Yeah, or the ego got in the way, and you weren't just entering into the process of the movement.
Which again means it's not a unified or a true value for you at that time, because there still is enough of a force blocking it. There's a greater force blocking it than there is empowering it.
Yes.
All there is there are forces within the body, perspectives. Not all of these perspectives are for the betterment of the body. Not all of these perspectives want awakening. In fact, a great degree of them prefer sleep, because that's how they get their fuel. That's how they feed. They feed off of fear. They feed off of a lack of perception. And so you have these inner forces. You have these inner forces. And then you have other inner forces that may be for awakening. And when the forces of awakening have more power in the moment than the forces of fear or lack of awakening, in that moment, the being will automatically shift towards or act upon awakening. Right?
Now, that's a very interesting idea, because when we're talking about forces now, and I keep going back to this image of these perceptual windows within us, how is it that sorry, I'm just having a little bit of a moment here. We're talking about different forces now, right? And I'm kind of aligning the idea of these different forces as these different perceptual windows. I'm kind of merging them, the two ideas on top of each other. So you've got like perceptual windows that are for moving towards enlightenment. You've got perceptual windows that are for moving away from that. Perceptual windows that aren't really interested in either. And we experience ourselves as one perceptual window. We think we do. We might not even be aware that we shift in and out of different perceptual windows.
All the time.
I do believe that. It would be wonderful to be aware of that process of shifting in and out. Because I think if you could become aware of that process, you could get to a point where you would be able to utilize the ability to shift and move, and use that to your.
That is where meditation again has its real value as far as the awakening process goes. So there are a number of essential qualities to specifically the type of meditation that I teach. The types of meditation that I teach in the book Experience Meditation Unbound. They're unconditioned meditation, which means that they're not focused on the body or the content of the mind to exclusion of totality. Right? They include all that.
It's inclusive. Yeah.
Yes, it's inclusive, which means it allows over a period of time the perspective window to become aware of what is in context with totality and what is out of context with totality. The greater that something is out of context with totality, the flow of life, the nature of life, I guess we could say, the more disharmony there is, the more noise there is. And so the type of meditation makes a huge difference. And so we want to have that allow the perspective window to start getting some context. And when that starts to happen, naturally a depersonalization starts to occur. And the more that things are depersonal, I do not mean dissociation between awareness and the body. I don't mean that at all. I mean a dissociation or a depersonalizing of the contents of the mind.
It's a disidentification with the idea of self.
With identifications.
Yeah.
And so then it becomes very obvious. You know when your friend has gotten into that nutty state where some weird identification has popped up and he's like a different personality in that moment. You know when that's happening. A lot of people are like aware of other people's shortcomings and when they're out of balance. We tend not to be aware when we're in that place.
Oh no, right. I know right. When I am.
And so awakening is when we're our out of placeness, for lack of, again, language fails, but when this perspective window and this body's expression into the world is out of alignment or disharmonious, and that perception can only really occur clearly when there has been that depersonalization that occurs to a sufficient degree that awareness can actually happen, and awareness is not trapped or caught or collapsed into the feeling, emotion, or thought that occurs. Because when awareness is trapped into the thought that occurs, it's not awareness anymore. It's reactivity.
Yeah, well, there's an identification with it, with whatever it's focused on. Mm-hmm. So there's a collapsing of something that has taken place.
That's right. So we need to get
the funny thing is, like,
in order for this to be valuable for you, the next step is to start to develop a better strategy, a game plan. What are you going to do every day to make useful baby steps towards awakening? And that means we're gonna deal with specific issues. I'm not good enough for specific right narratives that go on in the mind, because those are tethers that take you right down to something much more fundamental.
Yeah.
Okay, so what do you got in mind?
Well, for me, if I'm going to utilize a system that already worked with me from a dream point of view, I could take certain aspects of that and apply that. So journaling for me is something that I could utilize as a method of putting down experiences that I've had, putting down thoughts that I've had, all related to these ideas or the progress, that kind of thing, but journaling. The other thing is, I have been waking up earlier in the mornings due to things around me waking me up, or just I'm waking up at like 5 o'clock in the morning. And I have been using that time, it hasn't been consistent, but it has been something that I have been intending, a couple of times a week at least, to do a meditation in the morning. So bringing that into my life as a daily ritual, because if you're saying that meditation is part of the key in becoming aware of the nervous system, the relationship that you have with the nervous system, or like understanding what it's saying, going through that process, I think would be good as well. And then intention obviously is going to be is going to be a big thing. But the one thing I'm seeing is that there's different levels that I could actually work on. I could work on a more holistic level, work on more abstract ideas and concepts, basically bigger picture kind of stuff that's not so specific down to the detail of this core issue or this little issue or problem. You work more in a holistic fashion or sense, and then obviously develop some kind of process to hone in on those individual belief systems that are kind of, coming up. I'm not quite sure. For me, one technique is leaning into the discomfort. So if I feel fear, and this is just something that I used to do with my dreams. If I would wake up and have had some kind of nightmare or some kind of dream which is bringing fear within me, it took me a long time to get there, but I would go into a process of stepping into that fear. Whether I'd go into a meditation and face that fear head on, whether I would self-talk myself to the point where in the dream I become aware of the situation when it comes about and I'm able to change the outcome, to step into that fear and face it. So for me, that's kind of leaning into the discomfort, because the discomfort is where you actually need to be in order to dissolve or resolve it. You can't avoid it and push it away. Yeah. So if I'm getting scenarios or situations that are coming up to me during the day where I'm feeling that sense of lack of self-worth or lack of deserving, or the lack of power, to lean into that and to find out what's it trying to say. What is my relationship with whatever's come up? But face it, look at it. Don't run away, don't hide, don't put on the protective layers just to kind of keep myself safe, because it doesn't serve.
That's right. That's right. In fact, what you're describing there, I describe as being the warrior path. And it's actually essential. It's the way that we've ever overcome any difficulty. So it's not limited to what warriors do, but it is that mindset of turning into the fear. Right. I remember when I was in Japan, I taught junior high school, and we'd go on these school trips, for ski trips for our grade. We'd go on a ski trip. I didn't know how to ski, and so I just tried to bumble my way through it. And a ski instructor saw me as I kept falling down, and he says, "Your problem is not your technique. I mean, yes, you need work on the technique, but the problem is more like your intention or your awareness and fear, where you're placing your awareness." He says, at all times for downhill skiing, put your mind at the bottom of the hill. Aim towards the bottom of the hill. You aim towards the sides, which is an avoidance of the fear. What ends up happening is you get spun around, you fall down. But if you keep your mind flowing towards where gravity wants to take you, that'll keep your skis in the right direction, and you'll be able to step into a kind of guidance of the flow. And I find that description is perfect. It's a perfect analogy for the awakening process with regard to dealing with identifications and our fears and overcoming them. And that's what you described. So you're doing great.
It's funny because you're saying, essentially what the instructor was talking about is intention.
It's intention. It all comes. Intention is core. It's primary to all of this.
Yeah. It just shows how powerful it actually is. And I think we underestimate the power of intention in our lives. And we might lose sight of that goal because we might not be seeing something right now. But again, that might be because the situation is, we're not necessarily ready to move in that direction, or we get too much from being or identifying with that specific perspective window.
Yes. That's right.
Okay?
That's right.
We're not ready to let that go.
That's what's normalized. That's what we're used to. That's the habitual pattern.
Yeah.
So yeah, there's a point where one realizes that nothing worthwhile is accomplished immediately. Anything great that was ever accomplished is, and what people see of it is the pinnacle of success, the shiny thing at the top of a mountain of failures and revisions and in the process, right?
Yes.
And so none of that it doesn't just flash into being. So part of the awakening process is just recognizing that sustained intention without a time limit is guaranteed success. So time
Yeah.
in a way has to be removed from the calculation, right? We
And even an
accept
expectation.
however long it'll take. It doesn't matter if we die before. It's right. We're moving towards that, and we don't want to continue living in this unconscious way anymore. So it doesn't really
Hmm.
matter what barrier arises at that point. In a way, you're unstoppable.
Yeah.
And it's not willful anymore. That's just now the new perception. It's the way of expression into the world is you've seen through the illusion of impatience. You've seen through the illusion of temporary goals. You've seen through the illusion of the way the mind has tricked perception, right? And has normalized unhealthy things. You've just seen through that, and you don't want to live that way anymore because it's not useful, it's not beneficial. And a lot of this sounds very woo-woo, but I suspect it only sounds woo-woo just because we're not used to it. And then once a person gets sufficiently down the path, it's just like, it's obvious. At some point, it's just obvious. What I'm saying is not particularly insightful because it's just true of every human being. And when the human being has actually walked the path far enough, they go, well, that's just obvious. It's a self-edifying, self-verifying process that you will never be able to verify unless you do it.
Yeah, I mean, the one thing that I've read a lot of books, and I've done a lot of thinking in my life about stuff. And the one thing I've started realizing is that books don't satisfy anymore. I'm looking for an experience. I'm looking to know within myself what these books are talking about. So even if we talk about a book that I've read your books, you talk about experiences and all that kind of thing. And I believe books serve a purpose. They help open your mind. They help open your perspective. They help you kind of maybe question a little bit of where you are or who you are or who you think you are, whatever. So it creates space. Mm-hmm. But you've got to enter into the process. You've got to, what I'm starting to feel is that a book isn't enough. No. I'm looking for the experience. I'm looking to know within myself what these people are talking about, what you're talking about when,
yes. Otherwise,
and that's what trivia.
Otherwise, it's just trivia.
Yes. Because what does it really mean if it's in your head?
Mm-hmm. More identifications that cause more suffering.
Exactly. There isn't this experience, this deeply felt knowing within yourself where you enter into a process, an experience, as something that can verify, as you were saying. Mm-hmm.
So that's from that perspective, you may see there's a reason why the books that I write are written the way they are. It's all intended. The desire behind it is the person's going to read this, and then hopefully at some point the inspiration will fuel the force within them of awakening sufficiently that it eventually results in taking action. And within the book, there are some tools that allow them to take action. Whether that happens with everybody or not is, it's out of my hands. but it's the taking action that's ultimately what is the completion of the circle.
Yes, and I think that's actually the most important thing. I mean, it's one thing to read a book on self-help, but what are you going to do about it? Mm-hmm. You essentially equipping yourself with tools, whatever the book is. But the one thing I've always been curious about is how do I ground this information? How do I actually make it work for me? How do I get to a place where I can go, I've felt this, I know this, rather than I've read about it or I believe in it. It becomes something, it's a knowing.
So let's have you make an accountability, because the brain is made up of different and nervous system of many different perceptions, let's just say, perceptive windows, and most of them don't make it into our conscious awareness. However, certain aspects of the brain actually need to see the connection between what is occurring in the world and the intention behind that. And when the intention and what occurs lines up, that part of the brain is like all on board. So one of the things that I do, and I advise people to do, is to get a calendar, and on the calendar X's and O's on the day that if your intention is to do some particular meditation. Another great activity is Dance of the Self. It's in the Unbound Soul. That's one of the things that I advise people early on to do. Oftentimes we get so overwhelmed by certain feelings that it's difficult to actually depersonalize until we've released sufficient energy of that emotion in order to depersonalize and see it honestly. Dance of the Self is really good for that.
Yeah, I have done that once. I think I have done that once or twice.
Yeah, that's something that you start to see the benefit after you've done it for a month or two. Then it's like there'll be significant life changes at that point. It takes, again, a daily persistence to get the benefit out of anything that's of value, really. But you create an accountability so that you look at. So you look at the calendar and you have certain goals written down, right? And then every day at the end of the day, you'll X or O it. O is maybe you did it, X is you didn't do it. And it's not a judgmental thing. You're just looking at it and seeing what's actually occurring. What is the actual pattern of execution of the intention? It's not like
versus experiencing the outcome. Yeah,
do it today. That's not useful. That's another identification, right?
Yeah.
Right. And the great thing is, as your brain sees this, it allows in your nervous system, it allows a kind of tuning in to occur. So, okay, so say maybe you had an intention to do it 7 times last week, but you only did it 3 times. Well, 3 times is a heck of a lot better than no times.
Yeah.
Right? So the intention maybe the following week is to do it 4 times, right? And then you see, or 5 times, whatever you think you can do. Even if you only do half of it, it's a heck of a lot better than doing none of it.
Yeah. I think it's actually quite important what you're saying is, if you are taking the calendar and you are setting intentions and you are determining whether you're doing it or not, I think what you start doing is you're creating a visible map of something that you would not have seen before, because you kind of just go through the process of not having something tangible about it. It's just, I'm going to go and do this now, and okay, I'm not really, I think that plan and having that goal and having something where you create it, it's almost like harnessing data. It's like data capturing. And through that process of data capturing, you're able to build up reports. You're able to see things from nothing, if you know what I mean, just information, which you always had accessible to you, but you never tracked it.
And the brain needs to see something concrete, not just an abstract idea. The value is sort of abstract. It's the execution which is concrete. And we need to make an alignment between the execution, the concrete, and the value, which is the goal. If it's a real value, those two come into alignment very easily. If they continue not to come into alignment, that means it's some sort of force and identification within that's blocking that, blocking the execution, and you need to find that, right? And release that, right? I'm going to need to wind this down. But all
right.
But Clinton, it's been a fantastic conversation, and I hope you got something out of it, and I hope the viewers did as well.
Yeah, definitely. I really appreciate you hosting this forum. Allowing us to kind of share our stories with people, and as you say, I hope that there are people out there who can benefit from the discussion that we've had. And I know that I've definitely taken something from this. I feel really good about our talk. I feel motivated. I feel inspired. I appreciate you showing me there are parts of my life that there are things in my life that I've done that I can utilize because I know they work in order to make this work for me too. I hadn't seen that before, I hadn't seen that connection, which for me gives me a sense of, and this is just going against some of the stuff we were talking about, that I can do this,
Yeah.
I know we've spoken about it, and I know where that's coming from.
That will continue to arise because that's the brain's pattern. So you just, again, you notice that. and release
Yes.
the feeling in the body. There's a feeling behind it, and you release the feeling in the body.
Yes.
Little by little, that happens a little less often. It would be cruel and dishonest of me to say, stop that. Should never happen again. So
yeah, you know, the funny thing is when I'm looking at what my body felt when I said that, you can feel a stress come up within you. It's a type of stress. I don't know how to say it any more clearly than that. When I said it, it was like, and maybe that's what maybe that's part of the communication of the nervous system saying, hey,
Bingo.
there's something here.
Bingo. You're already getting it. That's it. That's it. So that's a communication right there with the subconscious through the nervous system. Feeling is your doorway to the subconscious.
Yes.
And I don't mean feeling like emotional feeling. I mean, it includes that, but I mean actually sensory awareness of the body and the body's reaction.
Yes.
That's your window to the subconscious mind, not the abstract thinking, which is why we don't want this process to be too mental, where we're like trying to talk ourselves into stuff or talk ourselves out of stuff or justify things. That's all identification talk. That's still the dream. Right? That's sleeping. So
yeah, nothing happens there. I mean, it's all just too whimsical. You know, it's not concrete enough or anything really.
It's disembodied.
Yeah.
Disembodied. But
and we are embodied, so we've got to bring that down.
That's right. I need to be signing off, so thank you so much, and many blessings to you in your trip. Sounds like you've already taken this a long ways, and I'd love to hear how your process goes. So,
thank you, Richard. I mean, we can definitely keep in touch, and but yeah, thank you very much.
Take care. Bye bye.